Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Tuma?
Here.
Council President Brady? Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there any public comment?
No, Mr. President.
All right. Well, the fourth item is the confirmation hearing. So we haven't done this in a little while. Seemed like we used to do it every day there for a while. Welcome to the confirmation hearing at which council will consider the appointment of Michael Chambers as fiscal officer of Cuyahoga County. For a little background, the fiscal department was originally established in 2011 and merged the offices of the former county auditor, recorder, and the auto title division of the clerk of courts. The fiscal officer must be a certified public accountant and must have at least 5 years' experience in the management of financial matters of political subdivisions. Since the advent of the new form of government in Cuyahoga County, we have confirmed 3 fiscal officers, Wade Steen, Mark Parks, and Dennis Kennedy. We now have before us Michael Chambers, who was nominated by Executive Budish to serve as our 4th fiscal officer. He is currently serving as the interim fiscal officer and will be made permanent upon council's confirmation. The hearing process will proceed as follows. The nominee will be offered an opportunity to address his qualifications, motivations for seeking the position, and outlooks and plans regarding the office. Council members will then be offered the opportunity to ask questions of the nominee. We will do so in rounds, allowing each council member to ask 2 questions per round, until all the questions of council, all the council's questions have been answered. Once all the questions have been asked, I will entertain a motion to recommend that council approve or reject the nomination at tonight's regular meeting. If we are not ready to act on that motion today, we will defer making the recommendation. Assuming a motion to recommend approval or rejection has been made, council will then vote on that recommendation at tonight's regular meeting. Thank you, and let's begin. Clerk, would you please read the resolution into the record?
Resolution number 2020-0031, confirming the county executive's appointment of Michael W. Chambers upon his taking the oath of office as fiscal officer of Cuyahoga County and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
All right, welcome, Mr. Chambers. You have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, Councilman President Brady and fellow council members. Once again, I'm Michael Chambers, and I'm here seeking the confirmation to be the fiscal officer for the Cuyahoga County. I will briefly discuss my background, education, experience, and why I would like to be the fiscal officer, if that's okay. Brief background, I've lived in Cleveland all my life, grown up on the west side in the Cam's Corner. I'm the son of Irish immigrants who came to this country for a better opportunity. They still instilled in their 5 children the value of working hard, the importance of faith, family, and friendship. And to be honest with you, I've tried every day to live up to that example. I'm married with 5 children. I have 2 boys, 3 girls. My oldest 3 are out on their own. I still have 2 living at home. One's a freshman at DePaul and one's a junior at St. Joseph's Academy. My wife, Maureen's a school teacher for 29 years in the city of Cleveland, and she teaches 1st grade. I have been a volunteer basketball coach for over 16 years, and for many of you don't know, I'm an avid walker. I like to do a lot of walking. So, education. All of my education has been in this great city of Cleveland. Grade school at my local parish, Our Lady of Angels, high school at St. Ignatius, and college at Cleveland State University, where I received a bachelor's in business administration. You each have my resume, and I just want to kind of jump down some of the highlights. Probably starting back in 1990 of my career with the Treasurer's Office. When I started there, I came in as a deputy treasurer. I ended up leaving there as the assistant supervisor in the accounting cashiering department. I was part of a team that initiated way back when what is known as one-stop shop, which was a procedure to help alleviate the burdensome on the taxpayer who was, going through a delinquency process. Instead of running them from department to department and building to building, we put our minds together and came up with a way to, do the phone calls for them and have them go from the one area right over to the cashier and make those payments. And we allocated all the monies to the right funds, whether it be the clerk of courts, the prosecutor, or the sheriff. So I'm happy to say that I was on, ground floor when that happened. The other thing that I did back in the day with the Treasurer's Office is, which is still actually in effect today, is back in the day we were getting hundreds of return checks from the bank that was NSF, and they just sat there. Nobody quite knew what to do with them. It took months to get them off the books. I remember one day I did get in an argument with the county auditor, and I asked him, "Well, we've got to do something better here." And, I said, why can't we back out the revenue? And thus, we created what is known as the revenue backout, which we use right now. So when the checks come back from the bank, they're backed out. Sounds like a simple thing, but back then with the way things were done, it wasn't that simple. But to me, the major highlight in my years working in the treasurer's office was that I co-led a team that balanced the county treasurer on a daily basis for over 9 years without any major incidences or issues. As you can see then, my next job was with the city of Cleveland. The reason I decided to leave the county was I was looking to become a school treasurer and I wanted to gain some additional experience. I ended up getting a school treasurer's license back in 1998, which I never really used. But I did go to the city of Cleveland to get some more investment experience, more knowledge with bank reconciliations that I wasn't getting where I was at now. Some of my highlights at the city of Cleveland. The city of Cleveland is much different than the county. They had well over 100+ banking accounts. And at the time I went to the city, a lot of people were leaving the city. It was kind of in a very turmoil state. When I arrived, the bank accounts for these 100+ were months and months behind. I'm happy to say within 7 months, we had them reconciled. When I also arrived, a very similar problem that we have today, the book to balance was out of whack. Back then it was about $1.2 million. I employed some outside help, and not only did we confirm that dollar amount, we also set up a procedure going forward to start reconciling and alleviating that. And as long as I was there was never a book to balance issue again. In addition to that, in my first year, I uncovered $110 million of improper transfers from the utility funds into the general fund. I worked with internal audit. We set up protocol. We had all that money reversed back into the correct accounts. That was a major headlines back in the day, but that was through the reconciliation process of our bank accounts that we found that. In addition, I found a check fraud issue where checks were coming back and they were sitting with the secretary, and sooner or later she started cashing them. And it was actually kind of a fluke that we caught that, but one of the taxpayers or one of the people with the checks called me looking for it, and I went and I pulled it, and there was that individual signature. So once again, working with internal audit, we completely revamped that process. And when they came back, they were under lock and key. The biggest thing that I want to bring out of the city of Cleveland was that their internal audit section, when I started, was only 2 people. When I left, it was a completely new department with 5 people. And in working through and uncovering issues, I brought it to the attention of the internal auditor. Once again, that was the avenue we went back in the day of the city of Cleveland. But it was also that helped fix it and address these concerns. And I really like to think that I was kind of one of the starts that, got that internal audit team in the city of Cleveland back up and running. But most importantly with the city of Cleveland briefly is that I helped stabilize the work environment, providing, leadership that was missing at the time, remaining calm. As I indicated before, when I went over there, it was a very chaotic time. A lot of people were being asked to leave, some voluntary, some not so voluntary. So after Cleveland, I had an opportunity in 2001. I received a call that the county was looking for a CPA to come over and take over for the county engineer, fiscal officer, believe it or not, that was a title, who was retiring. So I did that in 2001, and I stayed with that really up until 2012 when we combined with the rest of the new government. Some highlights back then, when I went to this county engineer's office, once again, I found an office that the financial stability was not where it is today, obviously. Most of the operating budget, half of the capital budget, was being used to fund operations and salaries, and it wasn't going to do capital projects. Within a 12-month period, we started examining expenditures. I elevated an internal auditor. Obviously, from my carryover from my Cleveland days, I felt the value of that position. I had them combing through all of the purchases, all of the financials, and slowly but surely, we changed the culture there at the county engineer. Another highlight there was we created what is known as a project initiation invoice. Sounds very simple, but in the old days in the county engineer, we would build a project, which lasted 2 to 3 years, and then we would decide to bill the community for their share. When I got there, I said, we're going to bill you up front, and as you can imagine, that wasn't met with great happiness because a lot of them didn't have it in their budget. They were used to the old way. But over a couple of years, we implemented that, and that rolled out to be a great success. That gave us needed cash to fund more capital projects. In addition to that, one of the things that I'm most proud of, I created what is known as a cost allocation plan, which creates an indirect cost rate. For every hour one of our men and women work on a federal project, I get that hour plus another hour and a half, plus another 0.6 hours back. It's a rate, it's a formula that our consultants have been using for years, but it was new to the county government. I worked with ODOT's audit team, they approved it, and the bottom line is over the 20 years, since 2002, close to 20 years, over $20 million have been brought back into the county that was never there. And I just checked upstairs, last year alone was another $572,000 that we brought back that we never would have had without this rate. It would have been easy to hire a consultant and just pay them to do that, but we would have lost this money that we can bring back. We're getting the overhead and an indirect instead of the consultant getting that. The main highlight of my county engineer career is that I changed the culture of how people spent money by letting them know someone was watching. And over time, you know, they started making better decisions themselves. 2005, we merged with sanitary. The commissioners had asked us to take over that operation. They saw that things were running a lot better with the county engineer. And that, once again, was they were receiving complaints from communities. And when we got out there, it was dysfunctional. At the time, our crews were only billing about 2 to 2.5 hours a day. So working with the existing finance team, we started to change the culture there as well. We went ahead and we implemented what is known as a productivity measurement. So within about a year and a half, we saw very increased in productivity. Once they knew we were starting looking at how many hours a day they were out in the field, what time they were leaving, what time they were coming back, naturally that all started changing. Once again, it was somebody was watching them, and that changed the culture there. The good news about that is, well, the bad news, the good news is that we fixed it, but when I got there, we were operating with about a $3 million deficit. Within 2 years, that $3 million deficit was gone. All of this positive change that we did at the sanitary division, in 2005, the annual revenues were $9.5 million. In 2014, they were in 2019, they were $24 million. So communities started seeing the value that the sanitary engineering division was doing. They saw that we're getting out there productive, the complaints stopped coming in. And so we took our operation and we started marketing. And I'm happy to say I was part of that marketing team that went out and started marketing our services. And our first big city was the city of Parma back in, I believe it was 2008. And from there, other communities started coming, Shaker Heights, Seven Hills, Cleveland Heights, Berea, even Lorain County. We're doing work with Cleveland Water, Woodmere, and Fairview Park. So I'm happy to say that once again, we changed culture with the sanitary division. And then, as you know, from 2010 to 2012, I was part of the transition committee that I offered advice to the committee that came over. I was one of the leads that they met with and were asking information from Public Works. I was selected to be the finance manager for the newly created Department of Public Works. And as you can see from there, I became the operations administrator and the interim fiscal officer. So qualifications I'd like to throw out there. I have a diverse background in accounting and finance and local governments, over 30 years of public service experience. I've worked with many auditors, internal, external, state, ODOT, throughout my career. I've worked with many of the mayors, managers, trustees, finance directors with all the communities, and I know the value that they bring to the county and its growth. As I mentioned before, I'm a certified public accountant. I'm a member of the Ohio Societies of CPAs as well as the Government Finance Officers Association. And I do believe I have a good reputation and a history of getting the job done. I just want to point out a couple of small things since I've been the fiscal officer, assistant or interim. A few things that some of you are aware of that we've started. You know, we authorized $11.5 million to go back out to the communities in December. I authorized robbery training for all the county treasurer employees and all of the auto title employees. That was conducted and completed by the end of 2019. Many of them have never been trained in that area, so it was a great thing working with Protective Services. The tax map in December, Mike Dever and I signed an agreement transferring the responsibilities of the tax map back to the fiscal officer, which is called for in the charter. Since the beginning, that was not done. In doing so, it also allowed us to take those general fund salaries and charge it to the real estate assessment fund. and that's about a $400,000 a year savings to the general fund. I also assigned a deputy auditor to, work with OBM and review some of the uses of the REA fund. And we also found out that, traditionally in many other counties, the conveyance department is part of the real estate assessment fund. But here it was part of the general fund. So we are now taking steps to go ahead and transfer those salaries from the general fund to the real estate assessment fund, because their job is critical to the success of the appraisals. They do all the updating of the parcels, they record all the sales. I'm going to grab a quick sip here if you don't mind. And they record all the sales, which is then used to do and make sure our appraisals and our property values and all that information is considered when we do our appraisals. As you know, from the very beginning, from my first day there, I've been very actively involved with the ERP. I've been doing everything I can to, more or less support the staff, make decisions coming my way. We've had many, many issues that we've reviewed and solved. And I've been meeting with both internal staff, external agencies. I've been very involved with that. We're all aware of the Harris Project, which we've had a committee meeting on that. We've taken some very positive steps in the few months that we've been here. Councilwoman Simon, I'd be happy to hear this one. I began to start working with HR to assign staff to go over to the kennel to finally try and resolve some of those long-term issues with the annual dog collection licenses. So we're working with that. We have one of the employees from the kennel coming over full-time to retrain our staff downstairs, and I'm working to hopefully permanently move some of those people out there. So that's something we've done. Once again, I came in, I had a lot of vacancies. Our payroll person left, and I replaced that, and that opened up another spot. I had to replace that. And then one of the other things that I have done, and I have another follow-up meeting, is I'm working on a succession plan. There's a lot of people here that can walk out and cause, some, I wouldn't say, it will cause hardships. And I'm working to try and develop a plan in the correct way that I can start hiring people to replace some of these people. And so we have a transition of knowledge and not wait until I walk into a situation where someone leaves and we're scrambling. I'm trying to be a little more proactive on that. So one of the reasons is, why do I want to be the fiscal officer? I guess my answer to that really is I kind of want to finish what I just started. There's a lot that we've gotten underway, and we have a long way to go. And I think I'm up to the challenge, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chambers. Questions by the council? Councilwoman.
I just have one right now through the chair to Mr. Chambers. I may have missed it, but why did you feel that you needed to leave the DPW or the county, Cuyahoga County Engineer Fiscal Officer to move up to Department of Public Works?
Well, you know what, there was a lot of things happening, because the county engineer, we merged with the sanitary engineers, then we merged with facilities, and as that responsibility grew, so did my title. I went from a $30 million to a $110 million operation with another $100 million capital plan. So that was just logic, me going up the succession lane. I'm still I was up until a few months ago, still with the county engineer where I started, but we are now called Department of Public Works. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you for answering my question about
I knew it was coming.
But I have another one regarding the Board of Revision. Shelley Davis has left, and there's been some discussion about how many of these separate boards do we need, and depending on the flow of the work, what, if any, opinion do you have about any potential changes to be made at the BOR?
For me, it wouldn't be fair to make that. I know we're in the process of bringing somebody else on board, and I want that person to do kind of what I've done all my career, is go through and take a look and maybe not make any rash decisions for the first month or two, but to learn and then come back and make some recommendations, because it's important to get a fresh set of eyes on things. And I think that things that could be taken for granted or norm may not be the norm to somebody else. So I would like to defer that until we have this new person and give them, I would say, at least 2 to 3 months to sit through everything and understand it better.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Miller.
Mr. President, Mr. Chambers, thank you very much for stepping up and being interested in this very important position for the county. As I'm sure you're aware, we've had problems every year in our annual state audits. Fortunately, the number and scope of the problems has been narrowing somewhat. My question is, how high of a priority would it be for you to eliminate the remaining problems and get us a clean audit, and how quickly do you think that could be accomplished?
President, Councilman Miller. Back in Cleveland, I faced many of these similar issues we're going through right now with the book to balance, going from a new ERP. 4 months on the job, I had a famous to PeopleSoft issue that resulted in audit findings. I've worked with state auditors all my life, since day one in Cleveland. Even when I was in the county treasurer's office, we had them coming over auditing things. So I think it's important to note two things, that a lot of these issues that we have, some of them are human error that we're going to get no matter what. Even I'm hoping maybe the ERP will enable us, maybe we can run better reports besides that old clanky system that we had. Maybe we can start identifying things. But to say we would never get an audit finding or anything like that would be not true. But to get this book to balance straightened out, we've already posted a position. It's out there, and I'm hoping real soon to have some applications in to select somebody to address that full time. That's a big issue that's been out there. When I was in Cleveland, that was out there for like 4 or 5 years, and it was dropped at my plate when I walked in. But it is a big issue, and I think you're all aware of that, and it's something that we need to deal with right away. But as far as all the other audits, working with the audit committee, working with internal audit, I've actually assigned our new assistant fiscal officer, Lee Tucker, to make sure that we're on top of responding to all the the 2018 issues, but also making sure our staff is on schedule for the current audit. Because remember, we're dancing 2 years right now, and I've asked her to set up meetings with everyone and make sure that we don't find any surprises that we're not ready. So I feel pretty confident that my experience will help us through all that. But to say we'll never get one, I couldn't say that.
Mr. President, to Mr. Chambers, I'm not saying we're going to get to where we never have any audit finding, but what I'd like to get for openers is to get one clean audit where there's no significant findings.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And once again, we're going in 2 weeks. We got the audit committee, and we're marching every one of our department heads who had a finding in front of them to, go through that process and get the questions asked and what they're doing. So,
Mr. President, Mr. Chambers, as you look at the various things that it's a large office, and my question is it sufficiently staffed in all areas, or are there any particular operations that are significantly understaffed to the point that you're having serious operational problems?
Council President, Council Miller, I would say at this point in time we have some vacancies that we're trying to fill, them and set the time aside with everything that's going on. It's been part of our biggest issue right now. I'm still evaluating. I am going to probably do some realigning of some leadership roles and assignments in some areas. But at this time, especially in light of the ERP being rolled out, I firmly believe that it's not just in my department, but all these departments, they're going to find that with the separation of duties and the additional controls in the new system, that some people's tasks and jobs will have to be realigned a little bit. And I'd like to wait to see how that's going to play out. There are a couple areas that I'm still on my radar. One is going to be the delinquent tax area under Mike Sweeney. I believe in the last 2 years they've collected over $30 million, and I would like to possibly utilize some of that DTAC money to hire another employee over there. It's a great program with great successes, and he's done a terrific job. The issue there is most of that staff is ready to retire. I want to get some people over there once again, and that goes into my succession plan. But for the time being, I think I need a little bit more time to see how the rollout comes.
Mr. President, I have other questions, but I'm going to pass till the next round.
Thank you, Councilman. First, Councilman Schron, and then Councilwoman Baker.
President. Mr. Chambers, I'm thrilled that you are very supportive of the concepts of internal auditors and audit committees, because sometimes they aren't well received by people in your position because they see them as checks and balances, which we as up here, I think, see real value in that. Is that my, hopefully reading the tea leaves right on your impression of internal auditors and audit committees?
As I told you, going back to my career in Cleveland, I was very involved with them. Even with the county engineer, we hired an internal auditor to help us out. So I do see the value in it. I see the value even with the audit committee. There's some very experienced people on that as well. And I do like the fact that we're marching our department heads in there before them next week to answer some of these questions. But I do see the value of the audit. I had no issues with it when they audited our parking garages in Public Works. It actually helps open your eyes. If you take it for what it's worth, you know, it's their job to find the issues, and it's our job to correct them. So once again, going back to the earlier questions, sometimes you need a fresh set of eyes looking at things.
You, just to go back in history, because you brought up many times here, the county engineers. That was obviously a source of a lot of the corruption, Kevin Payne, all of that. What did you capture when you were there? If you were right there in the front lines with internal auditing and that, what did you see was going on at that point in time? Because that would have tested your skills in this area.
No, without a doubt. But I will tell you this, when that all did incur back then, they hired a team. CBiz was the firm that came in. They audited everything, and there was nothing wrong with the finances. All that corruption was not involved with anything we did. Everything we had, from records on projects to invoices, were properly signed off by the leads, properly paid. Everything was done according to plan. That whole issue certainly was a tremendous blow. I had difficulty with that. Some of those people I trusted, I worked alongside, but nothing that they did was visible or impacted, you know, any of the things that we were doing and the controls we had in place.
So the monies in the internal, the monies that were flowing to some of those activities didn't flow through the department at all, that would have been showing up in internal audits?
We had contracts with those companies, but those companies were giving their own money to those people. It wasn't coming through us. So once again, when the invoice came in to pay, the work was being done. I mean, back in the time, we were heavily invested in doing, getting our GIS up and running. We had a lot of grants going on back in that day. All the support was coming in. It was signed off. It was properly paid. Because Company A decided to give Company B some money, or Employee A, I doubt that's not measurable through me. I wouldn't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure.
Mr. Chambers, you know, a continual weakness that I see since I've been here, whether serving on Board of Control or even in our committee work, is the lateness of some of the contracts that are brought before us. And we repeatedly ask why some of those are late. Some could be 30 days, some can be 6 months late. You know, it's poor business to have us supply the services that are absolutely needed with the contract being late. And it's also poor for us to make that supplier wait until that contract's approved. Where do you think, and then we've also been flagged by our internal auditor that this is something we need to work on. And outside of grants and federal funding that slow us down, which is understandable, what are you proposing, or do you think that it's even a weakness that we need to tighten that ask when we're confronted with a funding request?
No, I certainly do think it's important, and and I'm glad you call it, you know, took out the grants and other things that are obviously beyond our, you know, that just happened, they're beyond our control. I look at it as two ways. One is that, you know, people make mistakes and something slips, and we're trying to get everything through. And what I like to do, hopefully, is you know, maybe work with OPD down the line to see if we can't, you know, find ways to maybe speed up the approval process. You know, everyone tells you, you've heard it before, we have a lot of documents, and those, and I know Lenora, and if we're required to have those documents, she will not move that forward. Her team won't move it forward unless they're all there. So I think it's a bigger picture that we maybe have to look to see if there's ways that we can speed that process up. But I would also say that, like I said, some of that's errors, and some of it, is just that the department's got to do better. And maybe that's where you need to scrutinize them a little bit more. But no matter what we do, we are going to have oopsies that, this slipped. I mean, we're a big, $1.7 billion outfit. There are going to be oopsies, but I think we need to hold them a little harder. And I think by you guys continuing to grill them the way you do, should get the message across.
If I may, I think the most frustrating is when we're within a 5-year contract. We know that contract's going to be renewed, and yet that contract is asked for 2 or 3 months into the next request. And that is where I think that we could do better, and it happens too often, I think, especially for the smaller asks that are there. And somehow we need to have some type of guideline or something in place that tells us this contract is coming to an end. We need to ask for, if we're going to continue it, we need to ask for these 3 months before it ends instead of 3 months after.
And Councilman, I do agree with you, and I wouldn't even mind getting a team of the department leads and actually the fiscal people that are the ones doing this thing together and see if we can't come up with some solutions or some ways to make it better. Sometimes you do have an employee leave, and when he leaves, that knowledge goes, and that goes down to some maybe better planning, succession planning. But I agree with you. I see every time it comes up, I can see the frustration on your face. So I just know that our team in OPD will not put it through unless everything's there, and they shouldn't.
Right.
And so we got to find a better way to maybe help, figure out if we can speed things up.
Thank you. I just wanted to put it on your radar. Thank you.
Councilman Miller, you had more questions?
Yes, Mr. President, Mr. Chambers, do you anticipate any change in our strategy regarding delinquent tax collection?
Well, I certainly, Mr. President, Mr. Miller, I certainly would like to expand maybe notifying our team and getting people. Going back to Mr. Sweeney's operation over in what's known as the fishbowl, delinquencies are an issue. They're going to happen, and people they're decreasing a little bit, I believe. But I think what we end up missing is his organization is reaching out and continue to reach out to people to bring them in and offer them payment plans. And over $30 million in the last 2 years, I think, is a huge success as far as that is. I know we received a call from Councilman Plenzik about, doing something with these vacant lots in the communities and how we can go about doing that. I mean, that's another initiative that I'd like to take a look at. But as far as overall delinquencies, I mean, we do have the payment plans that are available to them. But my goal is, and continue to support Mr. Sweeney's efforts to trying to notify people before it's too late and additional costs come on.
Mr. President, Mr. Chambers, how high on your priority list is it going to be to get the problems with the Harris installation corrected and get it up and running?
Well, I think for me, it's very high on my list. I actually have a meeting scheduled, I believe it's Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. The Vice President's coming in once again. In our letter that we sent to them back in late November, we put them on notice, giving them till the end of the first quarter to deliver. They did honor the reduction of about $350,000 in that maintenance fee, but it is on my radar. It's very high. And, it's not just me. I'm reading my team as well, the ones who are there day in and day out. And there's a lot of frustration there. And I think by us putting them on notice, it's done its point. And then from there, I will continue to work with law if I have to, and we'll continue to move forward one way or the other.
Mr. President, Mr. Chambers, you mentioned about moving the conveyance staff from general fund to REA. Can you tell me how much money and personnel costs is involved in that on an annual basis?
About $1.2 million.
Okay. Mr. President, I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. Councilman Schron.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the Harris software, I have to apologize for being tough on you in the very first time I think we had, but I think you stood up there and knew that it was the position that I was holding accountable. It wasn't you as an individual, because you had just taken over. And I'm glad to hear that Harris has reduced some of the overhead on the maintenance. Why not the whole $500,000 per year?
Once again, and unfortunately law's not here. I mean, this was an ask. The contract does require us to pay that, and we asked. And the reason is they took into account, I believe, the October date that we started voicing concern over that. and they prorated it back. So, you know, basically it still results in it's a voluntary reduction, $350,000.
Yeah, well, voluntary only when they failed to exceed on their performance of their contract that was due 2 years ago. We'll leave that. It sounds like you were involved with PeopleSoft, which is obviously another version of an ERP system, another high-end quality like the Infor product when you were over at the city. Were you surprised that here we are, 3 years plus into this project, and we still have never received anything showing the advantages that we're going to receive, the cost savings we're going to receive, the benefits we're going to receive from what was roughly a $25 million project, now pushing into 30-some million, and this body has still not received a cost justification analysis of how we're going to get benefits, payback, all those things. Did you do that with PeopleSoft over at the city?
Once again, I came in at the very tail end, similar to what I'm doing now. I mean, I was 4 months there, and it was rolling out live. I only can test for what we did with our small piece of it within Public Works. I mean, we did do some projections on time savings. As you know, that went live a couple of years ago, much different issue. But, certainly can look into that. I can talk to the project manager and ask him to, if we do have that information. But once again, I walked into a lot of things happening at one time, and I've been hitting each one of them the best I can at this time.
Even the Public Works, we recognize and we're thrilled that we got stuff, but it was after the fact. It was not a justification to spend the money up front. It was after we started rolling it out, did we get support for the benefit? It was not.
I'll be honest with you, I know I did that well in advance because we were estimating how many minutes we'd save on tablets and things like that. I don't know why it didn't make it to you. I can dig through some old files and find that, but once again, it doesn't answer the bigger question, and for that, all I can do is I can work with Jack Ryan and try and get you some information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Conwell, and then Councilwoman Brown.
Through the president to Mr. Chambers, Cuyahoga County is always looking for opportunities to create efficiencies and collaborate with other government entities. For example, we have shared services on jail cost and public works projects. Do you see any available opportunities for collaboration that has not already been implemented by the fiscal department?
Quite honestly, at this time, no. I mean, not yet.
Okay,
one of the things that I would like to do is, I know in the old days, we used to go out a little bit more and make information a little more available, for homeowners, but that's more of an outreach. It's not so much bringing, helping cities or, themselves. It's more or less informing the public a little bit more about, their tax rates and how they can go about appeal and things like that. That was something that I would like to maybe a little more outreach than we've been doing.
Okay. As fiscal officer, you will need to access spending, appropriations, etc. of agencies you previously have worked for. Do you feel you can provide objective oversight to the Department of Public Works, even on projects you were involved in while you were working there?
I think if you ask the people in Public Works, I was pretty hard on them too. So yeah, I would have no problem with that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you, Council President. My question is with regards to the opioid mitigation fund that was recently established. What are your thoughts on this?
Overall, obviously my thoughts were a couple things when I realized that, that fund was set up. I actually am working with Trevor. I brought it to the attention about maybe some of the interest on that account needs to stay within there. So that, the money going in there, any interest earned was going to remain with that. And I believe council's working on something like that. I do think that, the administration has hired someone to oversee that program, but I also know that with our new financial system, as with the old one, anything coming in or out of there, we'll have a record to it. The good news with our new system is anytime there's a payment made, there has to be supporting documentation attached, so it should be visible with a click versus running to a file to try and find. So I do believe that we will have controls in place to make sure that everything's signed off accordingly once the determination is to move forward and the spending occurs.
So when you say that too, it brings me to another question. You oversee funds for numerous locations. Do you feel like you have the management skills and team in place to efficiently and effectively oversee the budgets and for offices that are miles away?
Without a doubt. I mean, I'm only one person. I have to rely on, the team underneath me. And I'll be honest with you, we do have a lot of good team members, underneath me. I'll point out one of my small weaknesses. I probably shouldn't do this, but, the county auditor is responsible for quite a lot of things, and and it's a very active community. We have an online chat room where they're constantly bumping questions back and forth. And I do have an in-house deputy auditor who's very, very knowledgeable in that area. So I know where my weaknesses are, and I know the people I need to put around me. I know where I can be helpful. So at this time, I do want to realign a few areas in the future. That'll be happening. Speaking of even in the Treasury Department, we have some suggestions on how to improve that as well. So you'll see hopefully you'll see that in the coming days or weeks.
When you speak of realigning, have you given any thought to satellite offices?
Once again, and we're talking the auto titles and such, because, you mean, no, that'll be a longer conversation, I think.
Okay. All right, and then my last question, Mr. Chair. It looks like your license is set to expire at the end of the year, so just curious, are you currently taking the steps to renew or?
Yeah, it's common with everybody. I believe I'm right around 79, so I have to take the last 40 something, but that's how it works. You're supposed to do a minimum of 40 a year. So I've been on track with that, and then this is the last year, so it's almost impossible to take all of them in 1 year. I mean, you'd be away from work too long, so yeah.
Okay. All right,
Won't
thank
be
you.
an issue.
Thank you, Councilwoman Brown. Councilwoman.
My question is supervisory in nature. Last year or year before last, we had someone who drew down grant funds to acquire some computer equipment, and it was used for something else. The equipment was. And so we had to, I don't know what the ultimate outcome was, but it was embarrassing to find out via the media that that these funds had been drawn down and acquired the right stuff, but it sat in a storeroom and it wasn't used. How do we avoid those kinds of situations in the future?
It's not an easy. You may not like the response, but we have to hold those department leads responsible for their grants. I know in Public Works, I sign statements every year that we have the expertise, we have the knowledge, we have the staff to make sure we can, honor these grants accordingly. It's the same thing with the grants you're talking about. It's up to the grantee organization to make sure that they're implementing controls and have policies in place. If they're sending down documentation to pay vendor A and everything's attached and signed off, it's very difficult for someone in my office to actually find out, well, that was not supposed to be for computers. I mean, they do their best. We try to sample invoices. If you go to my office now, there's a bunch of things still sitting there for quite some time where I think they were sample invoices that, we were randomly looking at. But that would be the only other way we would catch it, unless someone told us. But we do have to hold those agencies responsible for maintaining their grants according to what the terms are.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Baker.
Yes. I'm glad to see that you're another set of eyes on the ERP and that you're watching it very closely. There's a critical date coming up of March 16th for the payroll to go live. If we don't make that date, it pushes us off to another quarter. So the decision was to be made mid-February. Do you have any update for us to know whether or not you've been involved in that, and if you know that we are on task for the March 16th date?
You're putting me on a spot here.
I don't mean to. You could get back to me.
I'll get back to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions by the council? Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a fiscal officer, you oversee specific funds like the Casino Revenue Fund and the Veteran Service Commission Fund. I think I heard you reference DTAC a little earlier. Do you envision any changes to the management of these funds that you think are necessary?
No, my understanding is that those are council oversight funds that help fund our economic development and some of our other programs in the community. Veteran services, it's a smaller amount, but once again, I believe that's oversight by council. I know in the past we interacted a little bit with Public Works and buying flags and stuff and reimbursing some of the veteran services for that. But other than once again, your oversight, I have no objection to that, if that's ultimately what the question is, or, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions by the council? Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Chambers, talking about the Board of Revision, do you have any concerns about the specific, about the expedited foreclosure processes involving properties being transferred to the county land bank?
I think, once again, I think that's part of a suit and a bigger lawsuit. And, I'm aware we have 3 of them ongoing. All I can tell you is that I believe it was related to House Bill 294 or something in that vicinity. I think we did everything we were supposed to do correctly. I think that, that's going to work itself out in the courts, and we'll work with the prosecutor as our attorney on that, and we'll see what happens there.
And after it works itself out, you're gonna.
Well, I once again, I'm in a public forum. I do understand what you're saying, and rationally, it obviously doesn't make sense. But once again, I think that that's involved in a lawsuit right now, and we'll wait to see what the outcome is and go from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions from the council? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any final comments?
No, I look forward to joining you and serving you, and feel free to call me anytime.
Okay. I'd like to move Resolution R 2020-0031 to the full council for second reading adoption under suspension of rules. Do I have a second? I have a second. If there's any further discussion, none. Clerk, please call the roll. All those in favor? Do we need a roll call vote? We don't?
We do not. You had
Okay.
the option.
All those opposed? Hearing none. The motion carries. The resolution will be on council's agenda later this evening. Thank you. All right. Next, we have an executive session. And as always, all meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio open meeting laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During the executive session, council confers outside of the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's committee of the whole will go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining matters. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we ask all those not needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent room A and will re-enter the meeting once the executive session has ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining matters? Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. All those, do we need a roll call on that? Yes.
Yes, sir.
That's okay. Clerk, please call the roll.
Moving to executive session, Mr. Gallagher? Yes. Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell? Yes. Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens? Yes. Ms. Simon? Yes. Ms. Baker? Yes. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Tuma?
Yes.
And Council President Brady.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. The ayes have it. We will adjourn the meeting for an executive session.